Again, I want to say welcome. My name is Adrena Eiffel, and I'm the project director of the Avoice project. It's a virtual library of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and it was founded in 2006 when we first launched here at ALC during that year. We started with 4 exhibits, and we're very proud to have Dell as our founding sponsor, and also in collaboration with the Moreland Spingarn Research Center and the University of Texas at Austin. Since then, we've launched 2 other exhibits, the Women of the CBC, and now Environmental Justice. We're also pleased to have for this session our speaker, Harold Mitchell. I want to tell you a little bit about him before he comes up to speak. I'm just going to highlight a little bit about his accomplishments. He's a relatively young man, but he has had a lot of accomplishments, and I'm sure he'll go into detail, and you can visit with him personally and hear more about them, and also get involved with his group called Regenesis. He's the founder of that organization, and since 1998, he's been driving the process and tasks associated with correcting environmental contamination and environmental justice issues around the Arkwright community in Spartanburg, South Carolina. He spearheaded the development of community-wide movement called the Regenesis Project to accomplish the healthcare, legal representation, and revitalization goals of this community. Some of his accomplishments include getting a healthy living initiative at the USC Upstate Community Outreach and Education Center, winning a $700,000 Youth Build grant to build trade programs for disadvantaged and minority youth, and also a brownfields revitalization project, which was designated as one of 15 demonstration projects nationwide. He's been very busy. He's also in the South Carolina State House, and he, of course, does that in his spare time. He serves on the Environmental, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Committee of the South Carolina House of Representatives. He was the 2007 South Carolina Affordable Housing Coalition Legislator of the Year. He's been a panelist and guest speaker around the country. In 1999, he received the Trailblazer Award from the African American Environmental Justice Action Network. During the first term, he sponsored several legislative bills that are now laws in South Carolina, and they include criminal domestic violence bill, a low-income housing tax credits for affordable housing bill, and he established the Affordable Housing Caucus in the South Carolina General Assembly, which is the second largest caucus. He also was the recipient of the largest competitive grant ever awarded by South Carolina to his district. And now I present to you Mr. Harold Mitchell.
Good morning. Don't want to do like the congressman and talk about the ineptability of being technically challenged here in Washington. But I do want to correct one thing with the congressman on the referees, and that is we know that the referees in the environmental justice movement and in the movement period are called community organizers. And I know some people have a problem with community organizers. My goal here today is to share with you the Regenesis story in a way that, when they talk about having measurable results, that's one of the things that we see that everybody's concerned about throughout different agencies. And what I want to do is to be able to share the story, look at the lessons learned, and pay attention to the programs, the grants, and that either no longer exist or haven't not been reauthorized by this administration. And that would include the Interagency Working Group on Environmental Justice, the Collaborative Problem Solving, just killing the NEJAC, Brownsfields, and Superfund initiatives and the small grant program. Now, in this, what I want to do is to be able to just take you through and to show you that so often many people have talked about the Regenesis story, that it's the Harold Mitchell story. It's not the Harold Mitchell story. It's something that I think the pioneers who've pushed in the movement have been able to create tools that we were able to use, and from a $20,000 small grant, we've leveraged that into over $200 million. So what I would like to do, there are so many times that people say, well, it's not the typical EJ story. So I want to show you just a little bit about the project and where we've been able to go from here. As I stated, just pay attention to what has taken place, the initiatives that we used, and the initiatives that are no longer in place. Now, I grew up right here in front of this abandoned fertilizer facility, which is the largest fertilizer producer in the world, IMC Global. One of the discrepancies here that you can see, and I'm going to just shoot through, is that this is your typical site where the current owner was told to remove the sulfur. What he actually did was dumped it over the back of the fence next to Fair Forest Creek, which is a creek that flows right to our, it's a public lake where we have our public fishing and swimming. But underneath that sulfur, they found the old acid plant. And underneath the acid plant was the old, about 20 tons of sulfur with that. This is a stream where they released a couple of million gallons of acid into that same Fair Forest Creek, no fines. In the facility itself, this is a clean closure. You can see that there were over 48 tons of superphosphate fertilizer, the underground storage tanks, all the transformers were on. There was no water at the site just in case a fire had occurred. And also, in talking with EPA in the beginning, it was listed as an operational textile storage warehouse, but it was abandoned in 1986. The landfill, which is adjacent to this, according to the state, it didn't exist. You can see the drums that were starting to come to surface. Trees could not root because of the trash that was there on the site. Kids would run through from the neighborhood. And this is one of the test pits that EPA was able to pull up. And, during this time, in the investigation, there was a lady that rode with her husband every Sunday to dump at this particular site here. And one of the boxes that she was concerned about that they used to always take and dump was one that she had no idea what was in that box. And so one Sunday morning, she decided to go and take a look at the box. And within the box itself were a box full of fetuses. So there was the truck with all the fetuses that they had there that would go to this landfill. And the landfill is, you could look at this wall, and the residents' backyards were closer than the wall here. Everybody was on well water. Now, to move forward, after seeing all of this, I gathered a lot of this information, and it was at that time, with this, I got in it by accident, trying to deal with the facility in front of our house. I was sick for about 9 months. No one knew exactly what was going on. Doctors couldn't determine. I was passing blood, throwing up blood, lost about 37 pounds. And out of that is where, I just really wanted to see what was going on. Did the facility what I was able to see, was that contributing to the causes and the problems? So this is where, looking and moving forward, my father ended up with the exact same thing, and he died of lymphoma. But before his death is when I decided that I needed to organize and move forward, because his last words that he spoke with me, taking him to the hospital was, don't stop. You can't stop now. This information, which, my sister, she died of the sepsis encephalitis, and the waste material site was right in front of our house. So they had always basically said that there's nothing wrong, there's nothing there. And during this time, this is when I started receiving a lot of the phone calls at either the office or at home, and they would often call, and it's like, you troublemaking nigger. Always hang up. I would get that, day in, day out in the beginning of this whole process. And it was at this point when, began to look at, the presence of EPA, and here at this meeting here, I put more teeth into that executive order than I believe President Clinton probably should have sent me a little royalty on that one. But it was at that time that we tried to work with EPA to limit the expectations that the residents had in a lot of our workshops about, now that the feds are here, they're going to remove this landfill. Well, that wasn't the case. And in pulling everybody together, Senator Hollings and Congressman Clyburn came up a couple of times because the congressman actually lived in the community when he did his student teaching at one of our schools. So it was at this point we got a lot of our elected officials involved. My vice president in Regenesis, we elected him to city council. And that's where, as far as organizing the community, they begin to see that, there is a little power when we come together. This is some of the public meetings that we were able to, pull together to address a lot of the problems that we had within the community. And in this, environmental justice was the centerpiece, because health, social, economic, and the environment, these were all things that people began to see that were the impact within our community. The poor housing, the crime, Spartanburg, in this particular community, it's the largest concentration of public housing within the state. It's the poster child for domestic violence. Anything wrong you can see here. So this is part of what we began to build and show the community what we could do while we were still working to deal with a lot of the environmental insults that had impacted the community. Now, this is the Mill Village. This is a section here where once the mill had shut down and the fertilizer plant, they became incubators for a lot of the drug activity within the community. So the prostitution, this area here was one where I was standing taking this picture, and back of me was the old recreational center. You can find the AK-47 shells on the street right here, because on one side of the street they would shoot out against the others, because this is where the crack and heroin, that little street there. And these were the conditions of the housing. Now, behind that is the landfill, where you can see the telephone pole there in the background there, and their well is in back, and that well is actually right at the driveway of the landfill. This is something that once we received the HUD grant, looked at an alternate access, because one of the other things in the community was the lack of access in and out. The rail line that we have there, about 27 trains a day would go through, blocking the residents in, and one occasion the fire department couldn't get in because of the train on the track. By the time they got there, the mother and her kids were charred on the couch, and it was never addressed. So this is how we were able to look at the Federal Highway, who had also integrated EJ as part of their initiative. So we began to look at ways of designing an alternate access, which, working with Congressman Clyburn and Senator Hollings, got about $2 million to move forward with creating an alternate access road, which is called the Matthew Perry Parkway. Also in that, we began to look at assets within the community. What are some of the assets that we have? This is a dam which powered the textile mill back in the day, and Fair Forest Creek. I mean, we had a lot of natural assets that people within the community didn't even know that existed. Now, out of the IWG, when we came in, we saw that, the Department of Interior, there were initiatives that were there to help us address and make this a part of our overall master plan. So out of the IWG, when we got that designation, which is one of the things that, bringing all the federal agencies to the table with EPA, with the stick, did wonders for our local government. Now, out of that, because of the health concerns in the community, we went out with Health and Human Services. We established our community health center. Our community health center is one of the fastest growing centers in the state right now. In the area, we have about 20,000 patients on that side of town that didn't have any insurance at all. Right now, because of the growth and what is taking place with our center, the state has a migrant health program where they're turning over to our health center, and we just established a new health center in another county, which is in Congressman Spratt's district. One of the other things that we were able to do is pulling in from HUD and the colleges. We have 6 colleges within the community itself in Spartanburg. Now, it didn't make sense with all this technical support not to be able to plug that into the community, because a lot of times communities are stripped or having a burden with grants to do some of the things that some of the colleges and universities are looking for, programs that they can get engaged with. So this is one that we were able to deal with a lot of the kids within the community and a couple of our low at-risk schools. We created a program here, the digital storytelling in global classrooms. This is one of the classrooms in Pretoria, South Africa, that our school, one of our at-risk schools that was about to be shut down, we've been able to engage the two schools, and actually it's the first digital storytelling global classroom exchange in the country with our school and this one here in Pretoria. And this is one of the students here and one of our public housing students that went over with me to Pretoria. But even in this, you can see how on the screen our students engage with the students across, and a lot of the perceptions that we see from South Africa and our students, I mean, the engagement itself is just unreal of being able to tap our students, and start thinking globally. And this is part of the same discussion here. We also have been able to incorporate our Youth Leadership Institute within the community to start building our youth within the community, as well as, going after a couple of grants where we look at our dilapidated housing. This is a typical area where there was no resources available within our local government to address our housing conditions, so we went out with HUD again and qualified and received our Hope 6 grant. But in this particular grant, Regenesis was the recipient to deal with our Section 3 participation, making sure that people within the community were trained for the employment. So we trained residents through asbestos abatement. They were actually the first, and what I did, I took people that were either high school dropouts coming out of rehab. They were the first ones to go on. They were trained. The two ladies at the bottom, they actually, through their training, went back and got some more training, did the grading on the site, and now actually she's living in the site in one of the new homes. Just a year prior to her training, had never worked. Now she's got 3 certifications. 6 of the people actually ended up going to Katrina, 3 going to here to the Pentagon to do asbestos abatement. So it's just a thing of being able to create the opportunity. And when given a chance, these are some of the homes that have been constructed and some of the people from our actual classes and the public housing. We increased our minority participation from the first Hope 6 was only 5% to this one, we're around 42% minority participation. And these are the homes here that we were able to take out. Now, in doing that, we didn't have adequate retail space on the south side of Spartanburg. After urban renewal, we lost about 70 black-owned businesses within our community. Well, nobody's going to come in when you do an economic impact study if there's no density of housing. So one of the things with the grant and the rehabs and things that we were doing, we increased the density. So right after that grant, we were able to go back. One of the stores came in and said, well, we'll take a chance in going in there. Now it's one of the most thriving Save-A-Lots in South Carolina. This is one of the recreational facilities that we just broke ground on 2 weeks ago, which the city as a partner came into the project. Now, the thing is, the city had no interest in building any new recreational facilities, but because of what had happened and the transformation within that same area where I showed you where the textile mill village was right across the street from this, we took a person from within the community, trained them, got his certification, and he built 9 of the houses using a lot of the people we used out of public housing and the impacted area to rebuild this. And as I stated, we have a lot of people that actually come through that we're trying to teach and show about what we were able to do here in Spartanburg. Now, going back to the sites itself, the sites, the textile mill, our organization was one of the first in South Carolina to go into a cooperative agreement to do the cleanup on the textile mill site. We actually led, and we're the major stakeholder and driver in the cleanup of the textile mill. Now, the lessons in this is, achieving environmental justice requires a holistic approach, and this is what we tried to do with our community. Not run away from the table, because we had every right not to sit at the table with the city, who is responsible for, their landfill. And looking at the housing, education, everything overlaps. And a lot of times they're hell-bent on saying, when there's a public meeting, that they're expected for us to come in, vent, scream, run away, nothing's done. So in the very beginning, we tried to tell our community folks to, just hold your peace. If you got to scream, got to cuss, go in the bathroom, do something, but don't stop this meeting. We're going to get what we basically came after here. So one of the things that you have to do as far as in this empowerment is this organizational structure, capacity building, and the shared vision. These are the things that currently right now with our 2 Superfund sites, 6 brownfield sites, with our cleanup, we have Tom Fazio, who's one of the top golf designers in the world, is looking at, we've cleaned up everything around, but the inside of the donut, which was the properties that we can't basically put into reuse, we're about to design a public golf course, which there's not in Spartanburg, which would create about 32 jobs there. And Arthur Hills, who's a gold medal awardee of designing these environmentally friendly courses, is actually the designer that's coming in to do this. So when you look at what has happened within the community, the leveraging of resources and what we need to do as far as moving forward with environmental justice, we got to go back and incorporate those things that this administration has basically pulled the plug on. And the funding, I can't stress enough of how these grant programs to help, communities with the capacity building that they need to move further their agenda to achieve, justice and put back some of the things that we see in these communities that have been pulled out. From here, we need to enact, some legislation that, once again, by using an example, and that's part of what we basically need, and the best thing that I can see about Dell, communities, and I can say for myself, 10 years ago, in settings like this, I would sit in the back of the room and try to figure out what's the next step, what do I need to do? It was never an example. We had plenty of people that were constantly having to do battle at that time. I see Bob and Beverly here, and some of the other pioneers that were, kicking, EPA, and I can't start off with naming names, but a lot of you on the front row, that you basically led the effort to make sure that, communities like ours, and I just wanted to try to create an example that we can go out and show other people. And I think by having the Avoice where communities can go, look and see the lessons learned, look and see what works, look to see what they can implement, the tools, resources, and things that are out there, I think will be for the better. And this is where also in the state, because of what took place in our community, I was able to pass an environmental justice bill in South Carolina. And Congressman Clyburn will tell you, it's a Republican-controlled House and Senate. This bill went without reference. And I had a lot of people, Mr. Pear called, and he's like, man, how did you do that? And it was by example. They couldn't argue with the facts of what had actually taken place in our community. We got our police chief now that's quoting and going out telling everybody that we've reduced crime within that section there by 90%. Now, that is from a community organizer. Now, when you look at what has taken place within this community, we've addressed a lot of the issues, and I'm sorry, there's a lot to this, and I can't put it all into the 15, 20 minutes, but there's a lot here that you can look and you can learn from. EPA has created a DVD to show the lessons here, and I think this is where we need to move forward in the future, because if we bury the heads in the sand looking at, sources of alternative energy, we're going to be dealing with nuclear, coal power plants, and if we're not at the table, we're going to end up seeing the exact same thing of these facilities sited in communities, no training where the people from communities are actually participating in the workforce, and it's going to be a new cycle of environmental justice. We'll move from landfills and chemical facilities to nuclear facilities and power plants and some of the other things that we're going to see it. So we need to be at the table, and I think where the congressman stated too, we definitely have to pull together and look at the civic engagement, strengthen the environmental laws, and once again, I just want to thank Dell and the CBC for taking this up, taking this exhibit, and from last year we had Senator Clinton to look at the Renewal Act on environmental justice. So I think we're at a good time now that all of this is taking place, and the energy that Senator Barack Obama has put into the country, especially young people, and being able to see the technology, I think we're going to move beyond trying to identify the environmental problems to coming up with solutions of rebuilding communities. So I don't want to belabor the moment, but just wanted to just share with you. It's not a typical keynote speech, but we have to realistically look at where we need to go and the mistakes that we do not want to, have where we've had with this administration to put back on the table and reauthorize what has worked. Now, they want to gauge something, come to Spartanburg, look at this, and you can see that it works, and we need to engage it so that we can have other communities to have this exact same success. You cannot have it without having the tools that we had in Spartanburg during the Clinton administration. So I ask those of you to, look at that website, call your congressman, and we have really got to rev this thing back up. So thank you, Dale, and thank you, CBC.